you had famously given up on the Bengals. Now you're back on the Bengals.
I forgot where I'm at on the Bengals. But if they win this game 4-4 in the AFC, and part of it is they have not been playing well. They weren't impressive in beating, was it Cleveland or the Giants?
No, and then Cleveland.
Yep. Yeah, they weren't impressive in these games. The only games they've been impressive in was losses to Baltimore and Kansas City.
That's right.
That's
Washington.
Right,
Yeah.
Washington, where the defense wasn't, but they scored. But because the way the AFC is stacking up, you're going to have Buffalo probably in the East. That might probably be it. Baltimore, and even if Pittsburgh gets in, then Houston and Kansas City. Like, who, you know what I mean? So if they just get to 4-4, they have a shot. Now, they haven't been playing that well, so they could lose to somebody we don't expect. But this would be a good win because Philly's been playing well.
So I agree with you entirely about the records in the AFC. They're really not being – you can't find 7 teams that you're like, they're definitely good.
Right.
And so I think teams could be – I think there could be a team that starts 4-7 and is alive. You know what I mean? Because 9 wins could get you in. So to me, the question is less about the math of the playoffs and more about with a win here, will Cincinnati make you think of them as one of those upper echelon contenders again?
Naturally, I think you will, because you beat a team in Philly that has
just played maybe their best game of the year.
They've looked better since the bye, and then you start to look at who they have left.
Yes.
You got the Raiders after that. Then you got
the rematch with Baltimore.
The Baltimore game would then be one that we would look at like, okay, let's see how they look against Baltimore. But if they get this win and get to 4-4, I don't care how poorly that they've been and not married both sides of the ball and put them all out there to where it's like, oh, you know what, we're playing complementary football. As long as Joe Burrow continues to play great and not turn the ball over, they're going to be favored because of who he is and what we believe he has the potential to do.
Also, because this is what I'm going to try to sell you on, Wilds, because you're probably the most skeptical of Cincinnati. And there was 2 reasons. One is defense stinks. You're right about it.
Yeah.
The other one is wristwatch.
Yeah, also you lost the Patriots.
And
you're off wristwatch.
You're the only team that lost the Patriots.
No, well, so that's kind of what I want this to pivot on. I don't know if we can put their schedule back up there. And I'm not calling losses wins. I'm not. But I think we didn't know at the time Washington was going to be as legitimate as they are.
Yeah.
And that was another game that was back and forth the whole time.
Yeah.
Baltimore beat the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm not acting like they didn't. But we also all acknowledge that was as close of a game as you possibly can have. Overtime, chance to win it with a kick. And the Chiefs game, they were the only team in the league to lead the Chiefs for a second in the fourth quarter all year this year. And it was 4th and 16 to win the game. Mahomes makes a play and the kid for Cincinnati interferes. My point is, I think we are approaching enough sample to say the Patriot game was a wild, weird fluke. And it's not indicative of who they are at all. And what they've done since then is indicative, to me, of a very good but flawed team.
Yeah.
This
would be their first. This would
quality
be their first
win.
Quality
their
win.
best wins or losses.
Because that's what bothers me is they haven't looked good against these bad teams, even in winning.
They
didn't look good against Carolina, and you mentioned the Giants and the
Giants.
Browns.
They didn't look good. So, I'm starting to believe in Joe Burrow again.
Okay, so this is actually kind of funny because Nick is a little struggling here. For you Cincinnati Bengals fans, maybe you don't know, but he does not think that the Eagles are very good. He actually even has the Eagles slightly higher than he would like on his tiers. Apparently, he does not think that they're a good team. So it's like he believes in the Bengals, but it's like he's saying that this would be a quality win. But if the Eagles aren't really that good, then them beating them shouldn't really be that much of a quality. But then it's like, Greg thinks that the Eagles are pretty good, and so does Bruce. So it's pretty funny. Honestly, to kind of wrestle with that, because Nick won't outright say, oh, well, the Eagles are a good team, so, if the Bengals beat them, that's a great win. Because then if it's a great win, is beating the Giants a great win? The answer is no, so it's pretty funny. So I want to go back to the schedule because I think the Bengals are a good team. I do consider how you lose and how you win. That matters. That absolutely positively matters. Everyone loves to tiptoe around it, because of 2 reasons, I believe. One is fans freak out. fans panic. It's like they need things to be yes or no, black or white. If the Ravens beat the Bengals, that means 100% the Ravens are better than the Bengals. Lamar Jackson is better than Joe Burrow. End of story. That's been the most common theme that I've seen this season unfold. It's if you beat the other team, that means proof you're the best, you're better, your quarterback's better, everything's better. And I don't agree with that at all. That's not how life works. That's not how teams work. That's not how games work, okay? It's just not. As well as a lot of it is coach speak as well, that I think has infiltrated players, current players, ex-players, and then go into the media, and then also just media members who are listening, right, to coaches and players, and I feel like especially media members that have never played sports, they hang on those players and coaches' words so much more heavily and treat it as gospel rather than being a little bit more like, okay, based off my own experience, is this true? And this is a thing that coaches talk about, right? Coaches aren't like, oh, hey, we beat the Panthers, but the Panthers are trash, so who cares? No coach is saying that in meetings or at practices, right? They're not saying that. They'll admit when a team is really great and good, right? And they'll say, hey, we're going up against the Chiefs. We got to bring our A game. This is going to be a tough. We got to be perfect, blah, 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 blah. But when it's like, when they're playing a bad team like the Panthers, the Jags, there can be somewhat of an acknowledgement of, hey, they're not doing that good. But they'll be like, hey, they're not doing that good. But make no mistake about it, they're going to come out fighting. This is still an NFL team, right? Like, we got to play who's on the schedule, right? You always hear that cliche, right? You got to play who's in front of you. A win is a win. And that's coach speak. That's a way to convince players. And trust me, as a player, you get brainwashed. You know, especially when you're younger, when you don't have a ton of experience, like, you are taking whatever your coaches say as gospel and what the older players are saying to you. It's not until you maybe like get a little bit older, get some perspective, retire, whatever it may be, that you're like, okay, things aren't so black and white. But they try to reduce everything to black and white. And I think, again, because it's the way how fans respond, as well as coaches and players and what they've kind of bought into. But when you ever really talk to an athlete or a coach, and you're actually getting like their real honest understanding, and they've kind of gotten over the whole brainwashing aspect, it's very obvious that not all losses are created equal. Not all wins are created equal. And I talked about this with, friend of the channel, Travis O'Shea, where I was like, it's so weird that we only, in college, everybody really looks at how you win and how you lose, right? That's how these rankings unfold. But in the NFL, so many people just want to throw that out the door. They just want to say, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter if you win by 30, it doesn't matter if you win by 5, it doesn't matter if you lose by 5, lose by 30. A win is a win, a loss is a loss. And you can only play on who you play. And it doesn't really make sense, because on one side, we talk about strength of schedule. On one side, we say, well, who did this team beat with a bad defense? And on the other side, it's like you have Nick tiptoeing where he's like, I understand that the Ravens won that game. Like, he was like, he didn't want to say like, hey, the Bengals played better than the Ravens, but they lost. Because I know the heat that he would get from fans. Because anytime I make those types of comments, it's like people lose their mind, right? And they're like, oh yeah, what was the final score? And I was like, okay, cool. But I look at the Bengals because I try to evaluate not just on what the outcome is, right? It's so much more complex than that. I look at a game and a team start to finish, not just how well they were in the fourth quarter. Not just, oh, did they only have one bad quarter, bad drive, whatever it may be. And so, yeah, that Patriots loss was bad. The Kansas City Chiefs game, if the Kansas City Chiefs are the best team in the NFL, that a lot of people say they are, well, then the Bengals are right there with them. Because the Bengals had that game won. They had that game. So, and they weren't even fully healthy, right? They were down T. Higgins. They were down a bunch of defensive players. They had that game won. And at that time, the Kansas City Chiefs were healthier than they were now, although obviously now they got Hopkins. So if the Chiefs are the best team, then the Bengals are right there. The Ravens, they had that game won. I mean, that was an awesome game. That was an awesome game. You needed Lamar Jackson to be an absolute superhero, Derrick Henry, max capacity, and then it was still went into overtime. There was still a fumbled snap. Like, the Bengals had that. So if the Ravens and the Chiefs are a top team, then there's no way the Bengals aren't, even if they lose to Philly. Right? It just is the way it goes. And if they beat Philly, yeah, it'll also be a good win. I think people are still trying to figure out who Philly is. I think Philly is a good team. I think they have the potential to be great. But, even I'm like, I don't know. And it's funny because what Bruce said I thought was really spot on, where he's like, I don't even remember where I stand. Because it's true. I do that all the time. It's like I don't even remember right now because it's like I got to think about it. Like, who are these teams? Where do they stand? 1 minute I'm really high on them, and then like I think about it a little bit longer, and I'm like, actually, I don't know. I am giving too much credit to this one win against the Giants. The Giants are a lot worse than I thought initially. Like whatever it may be. So, but I'm very confident that the Bengals are a good team. Could they be flawed? Is their defense a big weakness? Well, yeah, potentially. But I think the Chiefs are flawed. I think the Ravens are flawed. I think every team is flawed this year. So I think what it is all of these teams right now are all good to great. Whereas last year, you had a lot of teams that were great to elite, right? The 49ers, top level, right? The Ravens, top level. Like it just felt more that there was more higher quality. Here, it's like a lot of these teams are flawed. And so I think the Bengals are flawed, but join the club. So this game will be really, really interesting. They're at home. The Eagles are I forget how Nick put it in his tiers or whatever, but I think it wasn't for the Eagles because the Eagles were below it, but I think it was like potentially dangerous. I think that's what the Eagles are, right? You don't know what you're gonna get. Right? Is Jalen Hurts going to cough the ball up and turn it over 2-3 times? Or is he going to throw pinpoint perfect passes to A.J. Brown? And is Saquon going to rush for 180 yards, right? Like, it so depends. So you don't really know what you're going to get with the Philadelphia Eagles right now, right? If the Eagles played unbelievable and honestly won this game convincingly or just still put up a ton of points and won 42-35 or something, that would not surprise me. And I wouldn't use it as an indicator of, Cincinnati's done. They're awful. But would it surprise me if the Philadelphia Eagles lay an absolute egg and Joe Burrow torches them? That wouldn't surprise me either, quite frankly. So this game to me is actually going to be a pretty cool game because I honestly don't have any feeling or sense of what it will be. Because again, I've seen what both teams have looked like, quite frankly, both the Eagles and the Bengals, and it's like I don't know what we're gonna get here. Quite frankly, I really don't. So either way, it's gonna be a really fun game. But in terms of faith in Cincy fully restored with the win, it was never really lost. There was concerns, but to lose faith in them, that means I don't believe in Joe Burrow, and it's like, of course I believe in Joe Burrow. What? I was never concerned about, wristwatch. It's just kind of absurd. So if they drop Philly and what I like to do is I try to think about it where I try to give when I go through a schedule, I give away the harder games and just say, they lose those games, whatever. And I try to take just the easy games, the easier games, right? And I give that, and that way you're most definitely going to be wrong, but it's like essentially what it does is it gives the floor of what's possible because especially because you'll probably win a game that you probably said you were going to lose, and you'll probably lose a game that you said you were going to win, but I think it gives a decent floor, right? So let's just say they lose. The Eagles ball out, they lose, right? Then they beat the Raiders, then they lose to the Ravens, they beat the Chargers, beat the Steelers, beat the Cowboys, beat the Titans, beat the Browns, beat the Broncos. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of beats. So I don't think I think they're totally in this season. They totally can make the playoffs and be legit. And I think it's whether they beat the Eagles or not, whether they end up beating the Ravens or not, right? Whether they split with the Steelers or win one game or not, there's still enough wins where the way I look at it too is if you can't win those games and if you can't win enough of those games to get into the playoffs, well then yeah, you were never that good, right? And it's like, okay, well then you were never that good to begin with, and then it's like, well, that's just the reality of this season, right? So, but that's just the way I look at it, honestly, right now. I think. Also, again, in terms of faith in Cincy fully restored with the win, like let's say you were on the fence. Let's say you're like, I don't know, kind of like Brew. Well, then the real question is like, it's not so much with the win. It's more like, well, what was the quality of play, right? Where the Eagles was really bad that game and the Bengals ended up winning 16-10 or something, right? It's like, well, are you going to have faith in the Bengals at that point, right? Like it all depends on the quality of play. If Joe Burrow balls out and is playing unbelievable, and he puts up 42 points and the Eagles just put up 45, you would be concerned maybe about that defense, but at the same time, you would say, well, the Eagles offense should be pretty legit, having A.J. Brown, Devontae, Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, a great offensive line, right? Like, so it's just, it's a tricky situation to be in, but I think the Bengals will be fine, quite frankly, win or lose this game, and because I'm really looking at these next 3 games, minus the Raiders. To me, it's like these 2 games right now are the Eagles and the Ravens. And I think that, or actually, I should just look at weeks 8 through 11 because it's 4 games. And my mindset is just win at least 2 out of those 4 games, and you're going to be in good shape. Because again, if you can't beat the Steelers, if you can't at least split the Steelers, well, then again, you probably have no bit. Like, what are you trying to accomplish anyway? You better beat the Cowboys. You better beat the Titans. You better beat the Browns. And quite frankly, you better beat the Broncos. I know the Broncos are not a bad team necessarily, but it's like, again, if you can't beat the Broncos, well then what's the point of even making it to the playoffs? Because then how are you going to beat the Chiefs? How are you going to beat the 49ers, the Ravens, right? Like what are you going to do then? So 2 and 4 these next 2 weeks to me is the absolute floor. Anything under than that, then you would be like, I don't know. You couldn't beat the Chargers. You couldn't beat the Raiders, right? Like then I think you're potentially running into some trouble. But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about the Cincinnati Bengals? Would faith in Cincy fully be restored with a win? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment, so whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions. Let's get in some fights. But ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here, and I'd absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to. Something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're on our way to doing it. And please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help with the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much, and see you next time.